Is it time to break up or at least regulate Facebook before Facebook breaks up democracy? Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Weird goings on in the social media space, specifically with regard to Breitbart, but I think this is symptomatic of a larger issue. Judd Legum publishes the extraordinary daily newsletter popular.info. Literally, that's the website too, popular.info, popular.info. His Twitter handle is Judd, Legum, Judd Legum. Judd, welcome back to the program. Your piece, was it this morning or yesterday morning, about Facebook and Breitbart? I found absolutely fascinating. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, this one came out this morning, and it was a piece about a Breitbart article that I noticed that claimed that Thom Tillis, the senator from North Carolina, had attended the White House event where they announced President Trump's new Supreme Court justice, and was wearing a mask, but still got infected with COVID. And the purpose of the article, as it goes on from there, was to undermine the idea that masks are effective. So, even if this were all true, it was a pretty silly article. No one claims masks are 100% effective. It reduces your risk. It reduces the risk for others, even more importantly. And of course, Tillis could have gotten the coronavirus somewhere place else. But what I knew, because it had been widely reported, was this was a complete lie. Tillis had not been wearing a mask for a good portion of the event, including, and there were pictures taken of this, inside the White House, in close quarters with many people who we know now have coronavirus, like President Trump, without any masks. So basically, it was one, pushing this really dangerous scientific information, and two was just misinformation overall. He wasn't wearing a mask.
Right. So what does this have to do with Facebook?
So Breitbart, of course, gets a lot of their traffic from Facebook. They're actually the 8th most successful publisher on Facebook. They had more engagement in August than the New York Times. So this is they rely heavily on Facebook. So of course this article was published on Facebook, and I noticed that it had gotten thousands of shares on Facebook just within 10 or 12 hours. And so it was spreading pretty rapidly, and people were using it as an argument against masks, which is the way it was intended. So the reason why this is important is, one, Facebook has a written policy that says it will remove coronavirus information that could pose an imminent threat to people's safety. And so in the context of a deadly pandemic, spreading this kind of misinformation could expose more people to the virus and compromise their safety. So I sent this to Facebook, and Facebook said that it didn't violate their policies, and their rationale was that they never explicitly advocated not to wear a mask. And so this is really a pattern with Facebook. They announce a policy. It sounds pretty good. No COVID misinformation that will put people at risk of harm. But then the enforcement is very, very weak. The enforcement is basically, it almost never gets enforced. And so that's how we end up where we are.
Well, and we've seen the same thing over the last 4 years with literally thousands of Trump ads and foreign actors supporting Donald Trump in a whole variety of ways, long before the election. Do you have any thoughts about a solution for this that doesn't, destroy Facebook, but that does clean up this wild, wild west?
Well, I think there's a number of things you could do. One is Facebook could invest more in their moderation to enforce their policies. I think the primary issue is that Facebook is convinced that its artificial intelligence will be able to sort out and identify posts that violate its policies. But it's just not there yet. Maybe one day they'll get it there, but it's not. So they need to invest in more humans, and not just humans that they're paying $10 an hour for in a warehouse, but people who are skilled and who could sort through this information. The other thing is to actually remove what I think is a real bias towards coddling these far-right websites when they become aware of clear violations of their policies and then find excuses not to enforce them. So some of it is a matter of resources, but other parts of it are really just a matter of will. Right now, they're very focused on making sure that these right-wing websites like them, that they're not accusing them of being biased liberals and things like that. And they've really created the opposite problem, which is they've created a cesspool for this kind of information.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if we've ever had this conversation. If we have, feel free to stop me. But back in the late 70s and throughout the 80s, myself and a friend of mine, a couple friends of mine, ran a bunch of forums for CompuServe. And back then, the law was that if somebody said something that was libelous or slanderous or a scam or whatever on one of our CompuServe forums, CompuServe could be held financially responsible for that, legally and financially responsible for that. And as a result, CompuServe paid good money to us, and we made a good living at this for quite some time, certainly throughout the late 80s and throughout the early 90s. Moderating these forums. I was running over 30 forums: the IBM PC support forum, the desktop publishing support forum, the Macintosh forums, et cetera, et cetera. And then the Telecommunications Act got signed, and that legal liability was eliminated. There was no liability to CompuServe for whatever got posted. Prior to that, they had to know who you were, and they figured that out by having your credit card. And we had to clear every message before it went live, or not necessarily every message, but we would have trusted posters, and then new people had to be cleared a certain number of times. I mean, we figured out systems for this, and we had a staff of like 30 people, of volunteers, literally all over the planet working on this, and it worked well. I'm wondering, there have been people, including Donald Trump, who has suggested blowing up that provision in the Telecommunications Act of 96. I think it's called Section 230, or maybe it's 320. That undoing that would restore some civility and sanity to the internet. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the policy, but I certainly think that the incentives need to change. So whether it's just getting rid of that policy and applying full liability to everything that's posted, or whether there's some middle ground that might reflect the fact that it is a bigger internet these days. I think that right now all the incentives are for Facebook to spend as little money and time as possible on this, and so it's only now the only tool you have now are outside pressure and bad publicity and things like that to get them moving. We saw today they finally did take down, after allowing a bunch of Trump misinformation about coronavirus and voting and everything else, they finally did take down a post where he said that coronavirus was less deadly than the flu. And I think that's partly because they've been getting scrutiny. But yes, I think ultimately there does need to be changes in the law. Maybe that's about liability. Maybe that's just recognizing the fact that they're too big. It's almost impossible to control something that's so enormous. And then on top of Facebook, which is enormous in itself, they've got WhatsApp, they've got Instagram, they've got so many other things going on that it really might be no matter how many resources you put on it, maybe it is impossible to control, and maybe we need to start thinking about breaking these huge tech companies that control so much of everyone's information into sort of more manageable bites, and also create competition so that you could say, hey, I'm going to go to this social network that does a better job of respecting my privacy, has better moderation policies, and things like that.